Welcome to Play It By Ear, the podcast of musical ramblings and genre deep dives. Each episode, my special guest and I will be exploring a genre of music chosen by you, dear listeners, and selecting some of our favourite finds amongst the tunage. The more obscure, the better. This week, Metal 777 as opposed to 666, right? I guess 7 is one better. Suggested Neue Deutsche Härte, or Neue Deutsche Härte, I don't know, something Welsh. My guest this week is none other than fellow YouTuber and German enthusiast Jimjamatic, who surprisingly has eyes for teeth. So, without further ado, let's get started. Open your ears and your mind to Neue Deutsche Härte. I think I butchered that. Okay, welcome, Jimjamatic. How are you?
I am doing fine now that I apparently have teeth for eyes, which is very painful.
No, not teeth for eyes. You have eyes for teeth.
Oh, sorry, that makes much more sense, yes.
So, what is your first impressions of Neue Deutsche Härte?
Well, my first impressions, obviously, were based on a band that shall not be named for obvious reasons, because they are too easy to mention. Yes. I'm trying not to mention that particular German band because, let's face it, they're the face of Neue Deutsche Härte. I sound like Boris Johnson then. The face of the Deutsche Härte. I started doing that weird pause thing he does. But anyway, yes, a lot. Looking for the list, there was a lot of these bands I'd never heard of. Some I've been familiar with, and there's one actually I put on my list here who I was actually a fan of for about a few months, actually probably in September, August I first encountered them, not realising they were part of the same genre as that band. How
long would you say you have been a fan of that band that we cannot name?
It was through doing German. I remember one of our assignments was to listen to some German music or podcast or a movie or news outlets or whatever, and just kind of either translate them or try and interpret them and basically do something with the language itself. And she gave some suggestions of bands that from Germany, and I was like, oh, I've heard of them. I'll just Google and see what I know for YouTube and see what different bands what songs they've done. And I was going through them, and the more I started listening, I'm like, I think I just found a new band. It was also really good because it also helped my German as well, because I listened to these songs and I go, what does that mean? I find a word out and go, oh, that's how you say that, or that's what that word means. And I'd learned admittedly some dirty words in the process, but at the same time that was always a bonus because for some reason that's the thing a lot of people do when they learn a language, whether it's German, French, Italian, Chinese.
That's great. You just put your hand up. Guess what I did for homework this week? I learnt the word for sperm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've got to that point in the podcast where I should probably introduce the genre to the listeners. If you don't know what it is, Neue Deutsche Härte is a style of music, and it's kind of a mixture between hard rock or metal music with lyrics sung in Welsh, right?
Oh yeah, Welsh. That's definitely a language.
Welsh, yeah. Some language that I don't understand. Now, the lyrics are sung in German with an additional layer of techno beats. The interesting thing is when they first sort of started forming was after the reunification of the fall of the Berlin Wall, 1989. Around that time, you had bands like Oomph, influenced by Neue Deutsche Welle, the new German wave. So it's kind of influenced by that, alternative metal and groove metal with elements of electro-industrial and techno, like we've said. Oomph was the first album in 1994, they released that, called Sperm, and it was the first release to sort of identify as Neue Deutsche Härte as a genre. What do you think the appeal of the genre is?
I think the appeal, I think it's perfectly built for German. Because if you take any other European language, maybe the exception of maybe Russian, or some of those kind of like obscure-ish Slavic languages that I can't even pronounce any of them of. With German, it's kind of stereotypically considered a harsh-sounding language. Especially given its very rampant history in the past 100 years. It's had a lot of ups and downs, and its language itself is very kind of harsh sounding to people who might not listen to it too often. And it kind of applies to rock, heavy metal, Deutsche Härte very, very, very well. the amount of times I'll be looking through comments of like random videos of different artists we're looking at, and they'll say, I don't know what they're saying, but I love the sound of it, and people saying German sounds good with metal. And I think that's part of the appeal, is the fact that it's in German. Like, if they were singing, if these same bands did the songs in English, like a lot of Scandinavian bands like to do.
Yeah.
Obviously, because that increases their appeal, because obviously more people can understand them in English than in German. Just naturally, given how wide English's range has been. Then I don't think the songs would be nearly as good. Like, the beat would be there, the tune would be there, the vocals would probably just as good, but I feel like a lot of the heart is in the German language with it.
Sometimes they do like an English version, and it's never as good. It's not as good.
Everything just combines with the language, the sound, the vocals, even the lyrics to an extent, and combining genres that shouldn't go together, and somehow making this genre work. And that's why it's called New German Hardness, because it's things in theoretically you go, okay, let's put techno and metal together, see what happens. Two relatively different genres, and they make it work so well.
Because it came from the sort of seeds of like industrial metal as well, which was sort of started by like American band like Ministry, so they were the start of like this industrial metal thing. And then you had come through with like totally German, straightforward drumming, which is really important as well, because it's sort of something you can almost dance to. Artificial string arrangements, loops, things like that. The vocals are mostly performed by men using a deep voice, right? And they enunciate every syllable. Yes, the R's. Is that called Sprechgesang?
Sprechgesang, yeah. It just means like kind of speaking voice, I guess, or speaking song or sound. I think I mentioned the name of the guy because it doesn't involve the band itself too much. But Till Lindemann, I think, said in interviews that he doesn't. Obviously, that's more of a thing. He puts on. He sounds. If you hear in interviews, he sounds nothing like nowhere near as guttural than he does when he's actually singing.
Yeah.
And it's that thing where it's part of the charm as well, where it's like it makes it even more harsh.
I'd like to focus on the lyrics, if I may. So a lot of Neue Deutsche Härte bands have a tendency to break taboos, let's say, by dealing with shock topics like extreme forms of sadomasochism, necrophilia, incest, cannibalism, and child abuse. So given that German is spoken in many countries but isn't the first language in many countries, and that heavy metal is loved in every country, why is it that bands like the popular one that we're not going to say are specifically popular in Australia, UK, and most of Scandinavia?
I'd say particularly in like countries like UK, US, there's a lot of things going on politically at the moment, this kind of dark thing. I feel like a lot of people are kind of drawn towards darkness. I don't think it's even restricted to like Australia, England, UK, US, that kind of. I don't think it's just restricted to those, but I think it's more involved in that. I don't know. I couldn't explain exactly why. Like, there's always that subsection of people who want to kind of revel in the badness of the world, I guess, but also darker subject matters. And like I said many times before, it's that kind of harshness of the language helps with the harshness of the subject matter in a way. The best one there was Deutschland, which came out last year or the year before.
I think a lot of Neue Deutsche Härte bands are trying to address the elephant in the room a lot of the time and saying, no, let's speak about it. Let's not shy away from it. Yeah,
because in that video, there's literally like people getting hung in the concentration camps in one scene. There's like people like eating, like there's cannibalism scenes in it. There's like people getting slaughtered like in night times and all that kind of thing. And I think it's probably my favourite message of any song they've done, because the way I always interpret it, again, my interpretation only of it, was that a lot of the lyrics kind of seem to come around of German pride or German heritage. Of, on the one hand, you've got to feel patriotic about your country, take extremes like America, for example, where it's like patriot or die to some people, you're a traitor if you even like buy a Mexican product or something, that kind of shit. But like, you get countries like Germany, for example, which had a very complicated history, especially the past 70 or 80 years, for obvious reasons. And you look at their past, and on the one hand, they're like, well, we've done a lot of advances in technology, science, post-war particularly have been very tough, but they've also had a lot of differences, and nowadays they're one of the more stable countries in Europe, economic-wise. They're pretty stable. Unlike some countries, Germans are very open about what they did in the past, and are very willing to show the public and their children what they did and how we don't do that again. Don't learn from our mistakes properly.
Well, it's embedded in the law now, isn't it?
Yeah, you can't do anything Nazi-related, anything like that. Anti-Semitism is very frowned upon as well as in law. The whole song is, in my opinion, is about being able to praise what's good about your country, but also admitting what your country has done wrong, and not lumping them in the same area. Because it's very rare. Like Britain, for example, you can say, "Oh yeah, Britain, we ruled half the world, third of the world. We did well. We made us the country we are today." And it's like, and then you have some countries going, "Can we have our stuff back from the museums?" And we're like,
"We took it. It's ours." Yeah. Let's have your first song or album choice. What is it?
My first choice actually was one we actually have mentioned at one point, but not too in detail, obviously. It's
spoilers. And the song?
The song is Links, Rechts, Geradeaus, which I'm sure anyone who's done basic German at GCSE or even lower knows what that means. Left, right, straight ahead. You always learn it, like, before we're stamped. Oh, geradeaus. Oh, danke. Yeah, that was the entire German exam. If you did lower, if for GCSE, pretty much, it was so basic.
I failed it.
Well, now you know which one's which, at least. Links, rechts, gerade. That is off topic slide. That's a really hard word to say. Rechts. Because you've got to have a sh with a t and an s.
Recht.
In Dutch, it'd be rechts. It's so much easier to say. It's just a straight. The song itself, I think it's more called Labyrinth. It's funny actually. The song's actually called Labyrinth, but I always call it Links West Geradeaus because they repeat that line so often. I always forget think that's the name of the song. I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
But this song I adore simply because it's really kind of creepy when you think back on it. The whole lyrics are like being trapped in a labyrinth, and it's like they never refer to the person as a man, a woman, an adult. It's always a kid trapped in this labyrinth. It sounds really creepy. It's like something from like a Tim Burton shit. It's like you don't know who to trust. You don't know who you're supposed to be. It's really that's basically a lot of what the lyrics are all about. They're kind of like spelling distrust in this person, like not sure where they're supposed to go, what they're supposed to do next. The guy looks like a ringmaster. He looks like a kind of tainted version of the Greatest Showman. The guy singing it. That's what it kind of reminds me of, just the look of him. But it's such a.
I always love that, like how they dress on stage. That's all part of it. Does it sound mega different to how more recent Neue Deutsche Härte bands sound?
I'd say it's probably closer to modern stuff. Like obviously this particular song I don't believe is as old as like I think this came out around in the late 90s, I believe.
Right.
So it's definitely in the point where the certain band had their influence by then, so maybe things have changed slightly. But I would say out of all the bands I've listened to, these guys probably have the least harsh sounding voice on them. Their look's not too extreme either. I wouldn't say like you look at them and go, okay, you can tell they're Deutsche Härte, but I wouldn't say they were like throwing fireworks at people levels.
Yeah.
They're not dangerous for society yet.
They're not arsonists.
Arsonists in training, that's why I always call half of them.
Well, I guess I'm just gonna recommend an album that I was listening to. Unheilig, Große Freiheit. Yeah.
Great Freedom, I believe.
Great Freedom. Yeah, it comes from 2010, and I suppose it's quite a melodic and softer album. Got a lot more classical instruments in it, I think. It's got like a choir in it at some point. The interesting thing is, in Germany, it reached number 1 for 23 non-consecutive weeks. So to date, it's the longest stay of any album in the 21st century. Great Freedom is the second most downloaded album of all time in Germany, just behind Adele's 21.
I thought it would be another German band actually or something. That's quite interesting. A little German fun fact for you, which is irrelevant, but just thought I'd notice this. On the actual album cover, it says gross with the double S's as opposed to the little S set they use for the double S.
Yeah.
That's because in German there's no capital letter for that. So whenever they have whenever the S set is used, they just type double S for the capital letters because they can't physically put the there's no capital form of it. It only exists in lowercase, which is why it says, which is why literally you have the double S's there. But normally, if it was written down like in text as it was, it would have the little B symbol.
If you hadn't already guessed, the very popular Neue Deutsche Härte band that we've been referring to as that band all the way through the podcast is Rammstein, obviously, Rammstein. Are you familiar with the German artist Heino?
I have heard the name.
So he's basically an old crooner, much like Pat Boone or someone, or Tom Jones or something. Very, very hugely popular in Germany, especially amongst older people now, obviously. But there was a bit of a hoo-ha with him. So he was meeting with the State Minister of Home Affairs, and he took a present for them. And he presented them with a LP, and the title of it was called The Most Beautiful Songs from the Fatherland. In the songbook, there were songs belonging to Adolf Hitler's Special Military Task Force. Heino is quite a conservative kind of guy, and he's proud of his culture. Now, the interesting thing is, he released a album of covers of different bands, right? And he covered Rammstein's Sonne.
Oh, that's one of my favourite songs by them as well.
Right? So he covered Sonne. And then, in 2013, at Wacken Festival, Rammstein performed Sonne, and they invited Heino onto stage to sing it with them. Okay? This has brought up some arguments as to what the views and intentions are behind both of them. I was reading like this study from European Journal of Cultural Studies thing. They call it double ironic melancholia. They're saying that Heino is looking back on it with nostalgia at the past, but Rammstein are looking back with ironic nostalgia, and it's more of a self-reflective, like you were saying before about them. They're self-reflective of their own identity and the Heimat, the homeland. Where is the line between being ironic and being literal? Because there comes a point, surely, where you coat your act in so much irony that it ends up being the thing that you're trying to, like, scrutinise.
The thing about irony is, it's one of the cases where you either get it or you don't. And that's the problem with it. It's so subtle. You also got to kind of know what the intent of the author or the singer is, as well as what they're saying. Because again, like Rammstein, for example, I feel like they do have the line, they tread the line quite carefully.
Do you think everyone gets that, though, from it?
No, of course not. There's lots of people out there who are stupid at the end of the day and some people just don't get irony. I don't mean that in a demeaning way, just some people are. Like, some people just might not get it, or might just think that what they're listening to is literal. Let's face it, a lot of comedy would be dead if that was the case.
Well, that makes me think of, like, Al Murray. His character is conservative pub landlord, you know. The interesting thing, a lot of his audience, and when you read comments on YouTube, they're all like, oh, he believes in what I believe in. It's like, hang on, this is a character, you do know that.
Yeah, it's like when you get those like shows like Faulty Towers where the main character is like an absolute dick, and you would never like them in real life, but you'll get people who go, yeah, actually I agree, I sympathise a lot with this guy, I really think he should have, I believe what he's saying. It can also be the case that you start off ironic and then you start believing yourself.
I think that's what Steel Panther have done. I think they've gone, yeah, we're being 80s hair metal, they're very misogynistic in the 80s, that's what we're going to do. But now they've become that themselves.
But Rammstein definitely, as far as they're concerned personally, they know what they're doing. It's just how other people interpret it, I guess, can occasionally be the issue.
Can I just say to my listeners, I have seen Rammstein live twice, and they're one of the best bands I've ever seen. So when they're touring again, I think this year or whenever Corona's over, go and see them. Go and see them.
Yet to see them live, and I need to at some point.
They burn your eyebrows off because of the fireballs flying across the arena and everything. Okay, because that brings us to your next choice.
Yes, my next choice was a band I actually discovered whilst doing research for this, who I'd never heard of before. It's a band called Herren, and their song Herren, which means gentleman, literally.
Ooh.
So you say, ladies and gentlemen, Damen und Herren, ladies and gentlemen. And it's the song Wach, which means wake or awake. This song is interesting because if you don't know German, it sounds cool. If you do know German, my god, these lyrics are horrible. One example is, wenn Messerschneider in dich drängt. Ein Chor von Engeln für dich singt. Which sounds nice, I guess. I don't know. Literally translates to when the knife's edge sticks into or penetrates you, a choir of angels sing for you. That is literally what it translates to. They're probably the least metal looking band I've ever seen. Like, I can see these guys on, like, I don't know, Mythbusters or something. they generally look so unoffensive. It's more of a case of this is a very this song kind of envisions the kind of darkness of the genre for me. Ironically, from the least metal looking band out of them all.
It's that time in the podcast. Soundtrack the situation. It's the part in the podcast where I ask my guest to describe what situation they would be in when this song would play. So, Jimjamatic, pick one of your songs and describe the situation that you would be in.
I actually imagine it being some kind of like nightmare sequence, weirdly enough. Like, I'm tripping on something, or the character's had something he's like regretting, or something bad's happening, and this song's playing where like people are just shouting him in different directions. The sub-lyrics to the song of him.
Right.
And in the background, he's aware of it, but he can't fully understand what's going on. Some kind of like weird sequence like that.
So maybe like that bit in Trainspotting where he's locked in his room, just like hallucinating that a baby's crawling on the walls, that sort of thing.
I'll believe you, because I'm still not seen Trainspotting yet, so I'll believe you.
Right.
It just fit the genre again. It's just that kind of madness I associate with those kind of songs.
Okay, I guess that wraps up episode 2. Yay!
Woohoo!
Thanks to my guest, Jimjamatic. Check out his channel if you like Robot Wars. If you want to suggest a subgenre for episode 3, then drop a comment below. The more obscure, the better. And likewise, if you have any suggestions of new German Hardness songs you want me to listen to, then leave a comment. And don't forget to like and subscribe while you're at it. Have a great week, and remember to be bold and support your local record store. Until next time, in a bit! Really hurt.